All right, everyone, buckle up because today we're diving into Nesta Archeron's journey in a court of silver flames.
Ooh, getting right into it. I like it.
We're talking trauma, transformation, and a whole lot of tension because Sarah J. Maas really went there with this one.
She really did.
Mm-mm.
And what I find so fascinating about Nesta is how Maas takes a character who starts off so harsh, almost unlikable even, and makes you confront the vulnerability underneath.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, put yourself in her shoes for a second. Ripped from your world, thrown into a magical war, and to top it all off, you suddenly have these crazy high-fae powers thrust upon you. Talk about a bad day.
It really makes you think about how someone would even process that. It's like, is this a gift? Is it a curse? How do you even begin to make sense of that kind of power, especially with everything else she's gone through?
Especially when it seems like the power itself is kind of, well, dark. Like in that line, she knew her own power could shine like that too. But while Amren's had revealed itself to be light and heat, Nesta knew that her silver flame came from a colder, darker place.
That quote always sends shivers down my spine. Nesta isn't just dealing with immense power. She's wrestling with the fear that it's changing her, corrupting her from the inside out.
Which honestly is a terrifying thought. It's one thing to discover you have superpowers. It's a whole other beast to feel like those powers are dragging you towards the dark side.
Absolutely, and it's a fear that's amplified by the strained relationships in her life. The book doesn't shy away from the tension between Nesta and Fair, the way guilt and resentment simmer beneath the surface.
Oh, yeah. That's a whole other layer of complicated. Like, they went through something incredibly traumatic together, but there's this constant undercurrent of anger and blame.
Trauma has a way of doing that, doesn't it?
Mhm.
It can twist your perception of everything, even your family.
Totally. And then there's that whole dynamic with Cassian, which is a whole other conversation.
Oh, Cassian. Talk about a complicated relationship. Even his initial impressions of her are telling: cold, sharp, dangerous. He recognizes her power immediately, but he also senses the darkness that fuels it.
It's like they're both drawn to and terrified of each other at the same time.
Precisely. It's a classic case of recognizing a kindred spirit, someone who understands the depths of their pain and power. And that can be a dangerous, intoxicating combination.
No kidding. But before we get too deep into their little dance of tension, I want to go back to something you said earlier about Nesta's relationships with other women, particularly Emery and Gwyn.
Because as captivating as the romantic elements are, it's crucial to remember that Nesta's journey isn't solely defined by her relationships with men. In fact, her connections with other women become a lifeline for her.
Right. And they play such a vital role in her overall arc, especially as we move into the whole House of Wind situation.
Oh, the House of Wind. Now there's a recipe for disaster if I ever saw one.
Right. Like banishment to a frozen mountaintop wasn't bad enough.
Right.
Let's throw in a training regimen that would make a god bleed, all under the watchful, irritatingly competent eye of Cassian. I mean, talk about tough love.
And those 10,000 steps, day after day. It's brutal, relentless, but it's also brilliant. Maas doesn't just use those physical challenges as punishment. She makes them a mirror to Nesta's internal struggle.
It's like she's literally climbing her way out of her own personal darkness, one grueling step at a time.
Exactly. Remember that line? 9,900 steps to go. Her head spun again. Her legs wobbled. And in the stillness, she had no defenses against what her mind whispered.
Ugh, that one gets me every time. Because it's not just physical exhaustion she's battling, it's those insidious little whispers of doubt, fear, and self-loathing that threaten to drag her under.
It's like the mountain itself is a manifestation of her inner turmoil. Each step forward is a victory, not just over exhaustion, but over the darkness that's been clinging to her for so long.
Okay, but can we talk about Cassian for a second? Because let's be real, he is a huge part of this whole House of Wind equation.
Oh, absolutely. And their dynamic during those early training scenes is, well, let's just say it's electric.
Electric might be an understatement. I mean, she's so resistant, so determined to push him away. And he just keeps pushing back, prodding at her defenses, refusing to let her wallow.
He sees right through her, you know. He recognizes that beneath all that anger and defiance, there's a strength, a power that even she doesn't fully grasp. And I think, on some level, it terrifies him.
Because he knows what she's capable of, both for good and for bad. Remember that line? He'd likely have that preening Morgan dump her over the border like so much baggage. And Nesta would have called the bluff, except she knew what she'd face down south.
He recognizes the darkness within her, the potential for destruction, but he also sees a glimmer of something else, something worth fighting for.
He becomes this unlikely mentor, pushing her to confront her demons, even when it means facing their wrath head on.
It's a risky strategy, but it's also the only one that has a chance of working. Because Cassian knows that the only way for Nesta to truly heal is to face her pain head-on, to stop running from her past and embrace the power that lies dormant within her. And that's where Emery and Gwyn come in, right?
Yes, Emery and Gwyn. Finally, a little female solidarity in this testosterone-fueled world.
Their arrival is a breath of fresh air, both literally and figuratively. They bring with them a sense of camaraderie, of shared experience that Nesta desperately needs.
They become her tribe, her sisters in arms, and it's in their presence that Nesta finally allows herself to be vulnerable, to open up about the pain and fear that she's been carrying for so long.
And that vulnerability, that shared experience, it becomes the foundation for something incredibly powerful. It's the catalyst for Nesta's transformation, the spark that ignites the fire within her.
Okay, but before we get to the whole fire-breathing Nesta part, let's talk about the blood rite. Because, wow, talk about a turning point in the story. The blood rite, I mean, come on, even the name sounds terrifying. This brutal Illyrian tradition, warriors fighting to the death, and Nesta, Emery, and Gwyn decide to not just participate, but to win.
They really said, hold my mead. It's such a powerful statement, though, right? This refusal to be bound by the expectations of this incredibly patriarchal society.
Oh, absolutely. They're basically throwing down the gauntlet, challenging centuries of tradition, generations of warriors who've been bred for this their entire lives.
And that line, we win to prove to everyone that something new can be as powerful and unbreakable as the old rules. That something no one has ever seen before, not entirely Valkyrie nor entirely Illyrian, can win the blood rite. Talk about a mic drop moment.
Right. It gives me chills every time I read it because it's not just about winning for them. It's about proving that they get to decide their own fate, that their strength, their way of fighting is just as valid, just as powerful as anything that's come before.
It's a revolution, plain and simple. And they face those challenges head on. They train together, they strategize, they support each other when things get tough. They become this unstoppable force of nature.
And it's in the midst of all that chaos, that violence, that Nesta really comes into her own. I mean, yes, it's a collective effort, but it's also where she confronts her deepest fears, her past traumas, and ultimately finds a strength she never knew she possessed.
And let's not forget that pivotal scene where she taps into the cauldron's power to save Cassian. Talk about a moment.
Seriously. And as the sun broke over the horizon, as Cassian's knife plunged for his chest, Nesta erupted with the force of the cauldron. I mean, come on. It's not just about the raw power, it's the motivation behind it.
She chooses love over self-preservation, risking everything to save someone who, let's be honest, she spent a good chunk of the book wanting to strangle.
Exactly. She finally tears down those walls she's built around her heart and embraces vulnerability, compassion, love, and in doing so, unlocks a power that literally shakes the world. But it's not just about romantic love, is it? That scene with her father's ghost, that's where things get really real.
Absolutely. That moment of forgiveness, of realizing that even in death, even after all the pain, love is still there. It's heartbreaking.
Love is complicated. She dropped a stare at that. But Cassian said he loved you, Nesta.
Right in the feels. Every time. It's the missing piece of her healing, the realization that allows her to finally forgive herself. And from there, well, she just keeps growing. She becomes this incredible force of nature, a warrior, a survivor, a leader.
So where does this leave us? With a character who's walked through fire and come out the other side stronger, more powerful, and more self-aware than ever before, Nesta's journey in a court of silver flames is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the transformative power of love, and the importance of finding your tribe.
Don't forget the magic. But yeah, it's a story that stays with you long after you've turned the last page. And ultimately, that's what great literature is all about, isn't it? It makes us think, it makes us feel, and it leaves us wanting more.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time, fellow deep divers, keep exploring those pages.